You're listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, brought to you by University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. Together, we will discover how we can thrive at work, home, and beyond. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Becoming Wildly Resilient Conversations. My name is Sebastian Calmes, Wellness Specialist with UKHR Health and Wellness. Today on the show, we're talking about intellectual well-being, looking at AI, creativity, and learning, and how the age of AI impacts our lives and our well-being. To talk with me about this very important topic is Trey Conatser. Could you tell our listeners about your role at the University of Kentucky and the work you do here?
I am the Assistant Provost for Teaching and Learning here at UK. I focus on our educational mission, how we can continue to adapt and meet the moment to prepare our students for a dynamic future, and how we can continue to nurture a world-class group of teacher scholars among our faculty and other instructors. So as part of that, I'm often involved in collaborating across different units of the university for that educational mission, addressing some of these opportunities as they come up for the institution. One of these for the past 2.5 years has been the rapid availability and development of generative AI technologies. I co-chair a group called UK Advance, which has published research-based guidance on the use of generative AI in educational, research, clinical, and professional contexts. I direct our Center for Teaching and Learning, called the Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching, or CELT. We collaborate with faculty, staff, students in support and other roles for teaching and learning. We partner with academic and administrative units and lead on larger issues impacting teaching and learning. We are a creative group, a support group for professional development and training, a think tank. CELT has done 133 presentations on generative AI, and we're about to welcome our second faculty cohort of our Teaching Innovation Institute, who will focus on AI in teaching and learning. And lastly, I'm deeply involved in my academic discipline, writing rhetoric and digital studies. I'm an affiliate of that department, and I also teach in the Lewis Honors College and the Graduate Certificate for College Teaching and Learning.
From your perspective, how would you define intellectual well-being and its core elements?
I like to rephrase it as a question, I think, of what motivates and sustains our intellectual engagement with the world around us, as well as with our own sense of self in relation to that world. We live in a time where there's a lot of changes, both in higher education specifically, but also in the world around us. Obviously, in 2020, the pandemic was a big change, but since then, there's a lot that seems to be shifting around us. And maintaining that engagement in a sustained way with the world and our own sense of where we relate to that is part of what we're trying to do in any learning environment to prepare for lives of meaning and purpose. Based on research and anecdotally on what we do in my area, I think there's several elements for intellectual well-being that are important. The first is purpose, a sense of why we're doing what we do, and revisiting that why and making sure we can still own it in that particular moment. The second would be a sense of agency, which I would define as an ability to act, but also a felt sense that we can act and be in control of certain things in our environment. The third is self-efficacy. This is a big one in a lot of educational literature. It's a sense of our own skill, but not just that, but a sense that we are able to gain new skills and learn new things. The fourth would be community and connection, a relationship with others. Do we see others and do we feel seen by others? And the last would be mattering. Do we have a sense that we have an impact on others through the work we do, the insights we gain, and how we leverage our own learning and intellectual development for larger flourishing in our community and beyond? All those things I think are critical for intellectual well-being. You'll notice if anyone does any kind of teaching and learning, they'll see and hear the general sense of active learning behind all of those things. And I like to wrap them up into this notion of intellectual well-being as well. So purpose, agency, self-efficacy, community, and mattering.
What is active learning?
Traditionally, in a previous technological age, educational environments would be one in which students are given information and they're supposed to study that information, maybe process that information in certain ways, and then the assessments would be primarily exam-based, depending on the discipline. Passive learning would be where we're just receiving information and not doing anything with it. We're showing we know more at the end of class. I contest that's not characteristic across education nowadays. In my experience at UK has been we are chock full of instructors who are doing tons of creative things to show students how professions work beyond the classroom, engage students with each other as a community, and have them do things with the things they learn. When folks invoke the idea of active learning, and that does relate to intellectual well-being in school, they're positioning it against this idea. We're not just giving people information that has no context and giving them assessments that feel inauthentic. We aspire towards learning environments that are conducive towards this idea of relevance, skill building, and application that show learners they do, in fact, have a community and an impact on others in the world around them through the things they're doing.
I like this idea of active learning. It feels more participatory, collaborative. I remember professors that would engage with the class, acting more as a facilitator than someone I listen to for an hour and then I need to regurgitate what they said. Why do you care about your intellectual well-being?
Why should we care about fostering intellectual well-being, and particularly why should we care about it in the way I'm talking about it, as having this taxonomy of practices and concepts that constitute it? One of the things we found in some research we did on teaching and learning during the first couple of years of the COVID pandemic was the importance of what we were calling meta-motivational awareness. So meta-motivational as in not just what's motivating us to learn, but our sense of what our own levers are, practices that can put us in gear in ways that are productive and helpful, and the ways that aren't, so we can avoid those. That we found was critical to both students and instructors' success if their meta-motivational awareness was higher, so that when they encounter difficulty, as we always do in learning, they know what kind of levers they can pull to enhance their motivation. I think it's important to know what we can do to enhance our intellectual well-being from a meta-motivational or a meta standpoint, so that when we are in these moments that feel challenging, as they always might be nowadays, we have this idea of what practices we can resort to enhance our well-being now and in the future. The notion of hacking things, like how do you hack intellectual well-being? It's an overused term, and it just means what are some effective practices. Nowadays, it's not so much this rogue hacking thing the term might expect, but it does have this suggestion we're just getting down to the actual practices that move us forward in a way. I think it's important to understand from that standpoint of if I find myself in a moment that's difficult and challenging, I can resort to these practices of thinking about how can I seek out some community? What are some ways I can feel like I can acquire new skills? That meta-awareness is critical. And from my experience, these activities that promote intellectual well-being derive from our work in teaching and learning. Practice is important, just like in the active learning. If we're not practicing, we're not learning. And there's different areas that understand that a little bit more intuitively, areas that are more practice-based, whether it's in music or athletics or some kind of skill-based environment. If we're learning, let's say, something in the trades, like the idea that practice is important is pretty self-evident. When we encounter new information, we practice with it, we get feedback on that practice, we reflect on the feedback and how we're doing. We're not doing it in a place of total comfort, but always pushing ourselves a little further with reasonable expectations so we can develop new skills.
I think that's an important idea of development where it's not too difficult, but just the right amount of difficult. Could you speak a little bit more on that?
This connects to AI and learning and intellectual well-being at this point, because a lot of the conversation around how different AI tools can enhance learning is around this idea of making things easier or freeing up effort or time towards the more important things. And a lot of that conversation is about what are the things we shouldn't skip over? Because when we're learning, we still need to practice. If what we're learning is communication, scientific process, professional norm, social contract, applying a particular theory, etc., then we want to make sure we're giving ourselves a chance to try and even fail. Fail forward is what some folks will say. To fail forward to develop those actual skills in a desirable difficulty zone. And this can be challenging, particularly in 2025, because a lot of user experience and products and tools around us, they're supposed to make things as easy as possible. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it can feel like if I experience difficulty, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with this product, there's something wrong with this process. Someone made a mistake somewhere.
Or something wrong with me.
There's something wrong with me, exactly. I'm not right for this. And that, for us as an educational institution, is hugely important to make sure learners don't interpret that as a sign that they don't belong here. Different kinds of AI-enhanced activities, whether in the classroom or is trying to learn things on your own, that's important to keep in mind, where you're always challenging yourself and trying to strike that balance between how different artificial intelligence technologies can, in fact, get you to that zone of difficulty that's desirable in ways that are interesting and innovative, and sometimes clearing away the clutter. Technologies can ensure you don't have to expend so much cognitive bandwidth on what one scholar, Kevin Gannon, calls procedural rigor versus intellectual rigor. The procedural rigor is the clutter of process or getting things set up and in order so you can do something.
Or holding multiple pieces of information at the same time.
Maybe. That could also be a goal of the learning activity at that time. When Gannon talks about procedural rigor, he's thinking about if the idea of learning is that students are practicing skill X, Y, or Z, then we want to take away all the other effort they would have to expend to find the information they're supposed to have, make sure they have the instructions with them, that they understand what those instructions are, if the core purpose of the activity is the activity itself. That's intellectual rigor. We have high standards and communicate that to students. We think they can meet them.
Yeah.
And that's what builds that sense of self-efficacy, that good faith engagement with difficulty, desirable difficulty that in ways can be enhanced with generative AI tools.
Talk about the difference between large language models and artificial intelligence. Is there a difference?
This is good because the term AI gets thrown around quite a bit now. It's a term we need to be aware of in terms of implications. The concept of artificial intelligence itself is a metaphor. In the 50s, out of Dartmouth, there's a particular debate of precisely what that means. Some scholars are doing a good job at exploring those edges and fringes. What do we mean when we say artificial intelligence? If we think about biology, kingdom, phylum, genus, species.
Gotcha.
We think about that. AI
it's a
bigger bucket. It's a kingdom type bucket. There's a lot of other kinds of AI too that have been around for decades in medical and scientific research, whether it's looking at images and scans of medical images, different kinds of machine learning algorithms that folks in quantitative research will use to help them with their data analysis. There's predictive AI, where we can take a bunch of data and then predict what an outcome will be based on that data. There's predictive technologies such as weather, even with texting, an autocomplete on that text that 20, 30 years ago people might have defined as AI. And one of the most helpful ways, I think, of talking about the fuzziness of AI is there's one scholar, Emily Bender, who will say, we have used the term AI to define an area where we don't quite grasp what the technology is. Once we have a sense of how it works and impacts us, we don't think of it as AI anymore. We think of it as something much more specific. So predictive text, for example, or looking at early grammar checkers where they would do those sorts of helpful predictive things. Now, with large language models, it is helpful to understand this as a different wrinkle in the story of overall artificial intelligence, because first of all, you're trying to deal with a level of data that has never been used before for tools anybody with a free account could have access to. They've used different kinds of machine learning methods and natural language processing to make a model of language that has billions and billions of parameters. And they're not just trying to model all of the vast, undifferentiated text. They've ingested what the relationships between different words and parts of language are, but also generating new things. This is that generative part of generative AI where large language models are being used. We're looking at all this language data, and then given some input that's processed, it then is asked to project something new. What kind of text can we generate? What kind of image can we generate? Now, 2.5 years in, it might be easy to overlook it because it's part of the zeitgeist that we have these language models and they can make text. But that was huge when these came out for popular use. We can generate new things. And that's where you're seeing a lot of the possibility this is unlocking and also some of the challenges it's unlocking. It's up to us as the people who are using it to think about how we can ask it to engage in tasks it wasn't expressly invented for, but it might have interesting results when we do.
I think there are many, many creative ways to use it that we're probably still discovering.
I'm glad you got to that topic of how you're using it to explore some things you want more practice in, because you're using it in a way that is helpful. You're not replacing primary learning activities, and you're using it in a way that leverages its strengths. For better or for worse, they're always going to try to do what we tell them. As long as it doesn't break the guardrails of generally what that tool is told is safe to do, they will try to do whatever we tell them to do. I think part of what is important is what we call pushback. If you're using a large language model or generative AI to help you develop intellectually, you want to explore an idea, a person, historical event, scientific phenomenon, medical procedure, whatever it is, look at it as something produced by a very sophisticated technology that has been able to probabilistically reproduce things word by word based on our input, based on its sophisticated modeling of language. It's up to us to bring our own intellectual agency. As much as this tool knows more than we do, we have lived embodied context knowledge that this tool will never have. It doesn't know your individual experience. It doesn't know what you said during class meetings. It doesn't know the interactions you've had with your professor and classmates. It doesn't know the thoughts you've had. It wants to have more of a global view of language. Even when we adapt them to particular situations, it still is going to have more of a probabilistic global view, almost like looking at a map from really high up. And you see the shapes, but if you get down into the weeds, that's where you see all the different mountains, all the different valleys, the different topographical differences. Just like landing in Lexington Bluegrass Airport, it looks flat from above, and you start driving around, it's all the rolling hills of the bluegrass. So your individual experience is going to have some variance and uniqueness to it that you can add to that interaction. It's supposed to do anything you want it to do. That's part of the superpower. What they're doing is trying to do their best precise approximation of what the correct language would be from an incomprehensible amount of data collection, analysis, modeling, and feedback. Because they are large and mathematically sophisticated, they often give correct responses. But for our own well-being and making sure we are developing our own sense of learning, that we're reflecting on what we're learning, we're not getting this halo effect of being around the right answers and mistaking that we now have the right answers, we build in this practice of pushing back, asking AI to explain itself a bit more, asking about alternative explanations. There's all these different ways we can maintain our own individual sovereignty in the face of something that seems to know everything and have an answer for every input.
I want to ask you what atrophies with AI?
There's a viral study from MIT and a sticky headline around your brain on ChatGPT, referring to those 1990s era your brain on drugs commercials. What's started to circulate is AI and brain rot and all these grabby headlines about that. People are talking about, does using this for learning atrophy our ability to learn and thrive as human beings. I'll just say for our own well-being, anytime we hear reporting on generative AI, it's always more complicated than what that reporting is letting on to be. That study is doing something way more nuanced than just saying it leads to brain atrophy, essentially learning atrophy, whenever we're using large language models. So yes, if we are using any kind of digital prosthetic, including a large language model, any kind of augment, and we're just asking it for an answer and not thinking about it ourselves, then we're not going to learn. We're not practicing. We're not doing anything we know in the research on learning that's going to help encode long-term memory, that's going to help us be able to apply what we're learning to new situations. If we're using it in that way, we're not going to learn very well. It's not active learning. We're just receiving the answer at that point. Even with the passive learning model, at least you're having to say what something is yourself on an exam. That's not going to help us learn. What I would take away from the larger question of learning atrophy with generative AI is we are actively invested in our practice as learners. We are using generative AI as an augment to help us with further tailoring our learning experience, whether it's asking for new scenarios, for further questions we can practice on. If it's in good faith trying to master the concepts and the skills ourselves, then we're doing well with generative AI. If we're just using it to get the answer, fix the problem, and move on. But as we've known for years in education and learning research, you don't use it, you lose it. As long as we're maintaining that sense of agency for ourselves and using them in concert with each other, and we have a diversified portfolio, to put it in financial terms, of strategies for learning, we'll do a good job.
How is the large language model augmenting my learning experience as opposed to replacing?
People like to gesture back to the classical Greek argument of, is writing going to make people terrible speakers? To what degree is this going to affect me? Is this something that's going to enhance my life if I offload it to this tool? And there's plenty of things I want to offload. If an AI can help me better optimize my efforts, if it can help me find information before I know I need it, that can be super helpful. But I decide what's worth skilling or de-skilling. I decide what I want to skill and de-skill. So one of the things I'm upfront about, even though my role means I'm often talking about AI writ large in higher education, I don't have it right for me. My area is writing studies. Writing is my superpower. It's the one thing I have very skilled work in, the ability to use language in ways that are effective in different situations. I don't have it right for me that much, but I use it for other things. Now, this skilling and de-skilling, of course, is relating to people's anxieties over the larger effect AI is going to have on their career prospects moving forward. It gets at these big questions about what a job is. Is a job a bundle of skills or greater than the sum of its parts? Is the unit of measurement the job or the task? Is it going to be entire jobs are eliminated, or are those jobs going to be transformed in terms of the tasks, but there's still going to be people in the jobs? In terms of skilling and de-skilling, that's the appropriate inquiry to have with yourself in terms of being aware what's being offloaded, what you're still striving for in terms of practice and skilling up for yourself when you're using these different kinds of tools that can be helpful.
Is the achievement of my goal worth the cost of what gets de-skilled? If I say yes, then I'm willing to de-skill those certain things.
And I want to put a plug in for the importance of skill and expertise. One of the initial philosophies that emerged in 2023 about AI was that now your bottom performers in an organization are average. Now your students that would make a D or an F in the class are now going to make a C. And this technology was pitched as this great leveling effect where there will be no such thing as below average at this point, now that we have AI that can write for people, it can do all this thinking for people. But what we found out in the interim, in fact, is how much it does matter that we have our own expertise and skill in the areas we use generative AI in, particularly the ones where we say it's important for us to upskill in this area, or the stakes are too high in this area. We have a both and, where we have both our own expertise and skill and a use of generative AI. From what I've seen, study after study has shown that that's the case. It's the human AI cooperation. I've distanced our work from this notion that the primary impact on skill is taking areas where you have no skill and making you average. Rather, it's showing us how important it is to still develop our skills and expertise alongside this new technology. Studies on expertise that get at this notion of what true expertise is, they're showing this idea of intuition, that when we get to a certain point of practice level and expert level, we have this latent intuition that factors into our calculations in addition to our response from practice. And that's what we bring to our interactions with AI in terms of skill and expertise.
Does AI change our approach to creative thinking and expression?
This is one of the deep questions about AI. It's getting at something that prior to these new AI technologies, we would invoke as fundamentally unique to humans. Only humans are creative. Only humans can write Shakespeare. It produces things that if a person had produced those things, that person would be considered creative. So it's challenging us to think about fundamentally how are we separating the human condition from everything else in the world. But there's also more practical concerns here around AI and creativity. I want to start by acknowledging them because there's very real concerns from creative professionals about how these tools have been built and trained. And I think those questions are currently being worked out, both legally and in the popular discourse and imagination around the relationship between the information that was used to train these things and creative output. There's questions about the impact this technology could have on human creative output if we're going to see it used where only a person would be a copywriter or only a person would produce content, media, or would be the artist or the graphic designer. There's real questions and concerns about how this could be leveraged not in a great way for a lot of these different jobs, and we're still working that out. There's also a concern about how we understand creativity. In one way, you would define creativity as a unique perspective the individual brings to bear. We say he's a creative person because look at the unique story he wrote, and there's no story like it. It's very creative. There's notion of creativity as creating, as making things. There's creativity as being able to come up with multiple diverging points of view. When an engineer talks about creativity, it's different than when an actor talks about creativity, but both do. I work across all 19 colleges here. Everyone talks about creativity, and it means something a little bit different to everyone else. There might be a concern that because of how large language models work, we're moving towards a monoculture or flattening.
Homogeneous.
I have seen the concern that we're moving towards this homogenization where the idea of taking all this data and turning it into a model that probabilistically generates different things in response to queries might, over time, at large, produce an overall homogenization, whether it's how you write or how you talk, or just the ideas themselves. From the perspective of the creative professions, there is a lot more at stake in being able to call something one's own for livelihood, recognition, security, and well-being. There's a lot of traditions of inquiry that think of us as assemblages of ideas and events. There's a more complicated sense of creativity than out of nowhere, I have the idea as the light bulb moment that could be cliche of creativity, but you're getting at these other ideas of intent. I intended to put some things together, and you're getting at ideas of craft, that there was a human hand, either figuratively or really, involved. What seems unique to the human experience of creativity, that we're responding to a question, that we're responding to some kind of felt need, some kind of gap that we would like to address, some kind of moment in our lives that seems to demand some kind of expression, and we get something out of that. It's curiosity that's fed by that activity. It's not just about the product or the output. It's about the process. There's something we get out of the process of creativity that is definitely uniquely human. There are some interesting experiments coming out that some artists are engaging in around what cases can we use large language models or generative AI in ways we would think to be creative with artistic integrity, for lack of a better term. Often we're talking about artistic integrity and using it creatively, whether with writing or visual work. There's the speculation as to what all these tools will be able to do once audio and video tools become more sophisticated and a bit more available.
AI movies, AI music,
That
all
kind of
that
thing,
stuff,
right?
yeah.
And there's definitely kind of dystopian visions for what that could turn into. We want to avoid those situations. There's also folks who are experimenting with what the human hand is in the process of using AI and the creative process. Is it just in the prompting? There's some interesting things out there, but the creativity part is related to learning, because when we're asking students or any kind of learner to think about possibilities, to design and execute a vision, whether it's a research project or a service learning project in the community or some kind of public awareness campaign, we're asking them to make decisions along the way, decisions based on what their goal is, on what it is they're trying to practice. And the creativity in that aspect is coming up with your own vision for what that process is supposed to look like. Now, there are different senses of creativity from that perspective, but often in digital composition, for example, we're dealing with students that are not trained in doing podcasts. They're not trained in making videos or websites, but that might be one of the assignments they're doing to practice those skills. We're not couching this notion of creativity in how polished or professional the output is going to be or how well crafted by some kind of high standard, but rather if they're engaging in this decision-making process along the way that's imagining the possibilities for particular audiences and making appropriate choices. Using large language models, you can help yourself, but if you're just getting the plan and then executing it without reflecting on why, then that can be a detriment, I think, to our own creativity. Because even when an artist approaches a song, there's that combination of intuition, just naturalness, or just jamming, but then decisions are made when crafting something into a final product.
What do you envision as the long-term future in an increasingly AI-driven world?
I have heard calls to rethink learning and development in the age of generative AI. I think it's important we take a long, hard look at what we do and innovate, adapt, and leverage these tools to meet the challenges we have now and that we can't guess in the future. At the same time, I think the future of intellectual well-being is remembering how we learn effectively and how we can be successful in a sustained way. And that has to do with general literacies around practices in our classes. It's about maintaining that sense, as I was saying, of agency and self-efficacy in the face of a technology that's very powerful and offers a lot of possibilities, particularly in concert with us rather than over us. It's about practice, feedback, reflection, and desirable difficulty, doubling down on this notion of well-being intellectually being rooted in purpose, agency, self-efficacy, and mattering in our community. As long as we keep that in mind, I think we're going to be really adaptable. We're going to have to deal with challenges that we don't even know yet because of the way technology will evolve, the things people will start to use them for. There'll be things that maybe we haven't guessed at yet. So cleaving to those things that we know are effective and that we know will help us be adaptable and succeed are going to be important. It's going to be important for us to be clear about our values, clear about our goals, how we're setting people up for success over the long term, particularly for higher education. We have an opportunity not just to react on the back foot to this stuff, but to be one of those lights that's lighting the way for what the world can look like. There's a lot of challenges. I don't want to downplay those. We're trying to work through both real challenges and theoretical challenges. But we have the opportunity to be clear about values, to cleave to what we know is effective for teaching and learning, and show how this can be sustained and adaptable for the Commonwealth and beyond.
I love how you mentioned values. That is one of the most prominent threads through this entire podcast. Almost all the guests always connect their expertise to the importance of values. I think that's important to have a clear sense of that as we continue our journey using large language models and however that may evolve in the future. And it sounds like you are excited about the future.
I am. I think it's a really good opportunity to be clear about what we're doing. I am worried about things just as everybody else is, but we are well positioned to articulate a vision, a process, and a future where we are trying to address these challenges and we're leveraging tools to solve some of our greatest problems. That is an exciting thing. And it allows us to show what we can do best. That's one of the good opportunities too. Mm-hmm.
Trey Conatser, everybody. Trey, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Sure, I appreciate the invite. For anyone in the UK community that wants to work through these questions, how it relates to learning, teaching, education, CELT is a place where we've convened a lot of voices over the past 2.5 years on that topic. Please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to be a conversation partner and help you work through your questions.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient. This podcast is brought to you by University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. We offer a wide range of online and in-person services to support the well-being of UK employees, retirees, and their spouses. You can find experts in mental health, personal resilience, nutrition, and physical activity. We're ready to meet you where you are and address your unique needs. To learn more about the work, life, and well-being services offered by UK Human Resources, visit hr.uky.edu/wellbeing. You can also connect with us on social media and YouTube by searching @UKY Wellness or by email at healthandwellness@uky.edu.